the man who reclaimed the sky. Cameron Ellison stood in the airport line like everyone else, his expression quiet and reserved as he clutched his valid first-class ticket. He wore a sleek, dark gray suit with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. But something in the air felt off. The usual rhythm of boarding procedures had a hitch in it, an uncomfortable pause that had nothing to do with logistics. As he waited patiently, the friendly smile on the face of the gate agent began to harden into something else, an expression that betrayed a deeply ingrained suspicion. The agent, a woman in her early 40s named Dana Whitmore, wore professionalism like a mask, but it slipped as soon as she looked at Cameron. "This can't be right," she murmured, her voice low but sharp, tinged with something more than procedural doubt. Before he could ask what the issue was, she waved her hand and called for security. Moments later, Cameron found himself surrounded by uniformed personnel, being questioned as if he'd attempted to board with forged documents. The other passengers around him went quiet. They stared, but no one intervened. The atmosphere was thick with something unspoken, an old prejudice that had worn new clothes. Cameron didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched them with eyes that had seen this kind of treatment before, eyes that carried the weight of a life lived fighting assumptions. They escorted him to a small security office, windowless, sterile, and heavy with fluorescent light. Officer Mitch Landry did most of the talking. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it was clipped, dismissive, already certain of Cameron's guilt. He examined Cameron's documents repeatedly, eventually conceding, "Your boarding pass is valid, Mr. Ellison," but the way he said it carried no apology. The real insult didn't come from the verification process. It came from the insinuation that Cameron didn't belong in first class. He was eventually led back to the gate, flanked by two officers. But Cameron's dignity remained intact. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and sent a message, a single encrypted text, quiet and deliberate. That message lit the fuse. Elsewhere in the terminal, a young IT intern named Marcus Bell had watched everything unfold. Fresh out of college, working part-time while pursuing his degree, Marcus knew injustice when he saw it. He typed out a detailed account of the incident and sent it to his supervisor, Naomi Jennings, a seasoned network administrator for the airline's internal systems. Naomi didn't hesitate. She launched a search through the system logs, looking for discrepancies. What she found stunned her: flagged entries, unexplained overrides, and activity logs marked by a specific pattern. Cameron Ellison had been targeted. But Dana Whitmore didn't care. Hours later, in a nearby cafe near Terminal E, she laughed with two coworkers. "He didn't look like he belonged in first," she said with a smirk. "I trust my instincts." Marcus, sitting a table away, heard every word. He recorded it on his phone and sent it straight to Naomi. Back at the airline's corporate headquarters, Executive Director Leonard Nash was fielding crisis calls as reports started to pour in: passenger delays, system outages, gate reassignments. Naomi flagged the files and pushed them to leadership. The phrase "Protocol Atlas" appeared again and again in system logs. Cameron's encrypted message hadn't been a plea for justice. It had been an activation code. Years ago, long before he'd made his way into first class, Cameron Ellison had built a private technology firm, Ellison Dynamics. Quietly, his systems had become the unseen infrastructure supporting airlines, transit grids, and even government logistics. He had licensed key modules to dozens of clients, including this airline, Skybridge Air. But with each license came a backdoor, a failsafe, a tether to accountability buried so deep that only someone who built it could pull it. And now he was pulling it. Inside the control room at Skybridge HQ, the system began to blink red. Planes were being routed to inactive gates. Passenger data became jumbled. Boarding assignments doubled. By the time corporate realized the magnitude, dozens of flights had been delayed. Marcus's initial message triggered an internal investigation. But what investigators found was far more terrifying than a PR mishap. This wasn't a random glitch. It was a systematic digital dismantling, orchestrated from within. By the end of the day, airline spokespersons scrambled to issue statements. Dana Whitmore had been placed on administrative leave. But it wasn't enough. Naomi Jennings confronted her CEO, Derek Hawthorne, in the boardroom. "He's not just reacting," she said. "This has been building for years. You treated him like an error in the system, but he built the system." "Then why isn't he saying anything?" Derek asked. "Because he doesn't need to," Naomi replied. "He already knows how this ends." Across the country, news networks picked up the story. Footage of Cameron's calm demeanor as he was escorted out of the gate went viral. Whispers became voices. Former employees spoke up. Passengers posted their own experiences, being downgraded, questioned, ignored. By the time the company tried to deny systemic bias, the damage was done. Cameron Ellison's silence had done more than words ever could. In his private office overlooking San Francisco Bay, Cameron stood before a bank of screens, watching flight paths blink in real time. Each disruption wasn't chaos, it was calibration. He was making the system transparent, revealing every weak point, every falsified clearance, every discriminatory algorithm. He didn't want the company destroyed. He wanted it reformed. But on his terms. He triggered Phase 2. Documents began to leak, HR complaints buried under non-disclosure agreements. Maintenance logs revealing ignored repairs. Emails from executives referring to preferred passenger profiles. At Skybridge HQ, the board convened in panic. Chairman Robert Pennington read aloud from a leaked memo. Ensure first-class zones remain aesthetically aligned with brand image. That single line said everything. Cameron hadn't been an anomaly. He had been proof of an exclusionary design. In a secure room at Ellison Dynamics, Evelyn Ford, Cameron's longtime advisor, coordinated with cybersecurity teams to prepare the final release. Thousands of files. Unaltered. Untouched. Proof of systemic abuse. Before they send it, Evelyn turned to Cameron. They're going to offer a deal. They should, he replied. But we don't settle. Not until it's rebuilt. Hours later, the board offered a compromise. Policy reviews, a public apology, Dana's termination. Cameron rejected it. Instead, he offered them an acquisition agreement. Ellison Dynamics would buy a controlling stake in Skybridge Air, not as a silent investor, but as the new operational authority. The board, out of options, voted unanimously. By morning, the headlines read, Skybridge acquired, Ellison Dynamics to lead industry reform. Marcus Bell, still an intern, received a new assignment, transition coordinator for terminal equity implementation. A quiet message arrived on his phone. You helped start this. Welcome to the rebuild. Meanwhile, Dana Whitmore sat across from two compliance officers in a bare office at Washington International. Her eyes were wide as they laid out her history, flagged reports, ignored warnings, comments she thought were private. There was no policy that told you to question him, one officer said gently. You chose to. At Skybridge's former headquarters, employees walked through quiet halls now stripped of old branding. Crisis maps replaced vision boards. Executives were reassigned or removed. HR rolled out new standards under the guidance of ethics teams, many of them led by people who had once been silenced. Cameron arrived at Gate 12 a week later. The same gate. But this time, he walked through it not as a passenger or a statistic, but as the new owner. A new plaque hung on the wall. All seats earned. All faces welcome. Re-established April 2025. Children played nearby. Travelers moved easily through the terminal. No whispers. No double takes. A woman in a wheelchair was escorted into first class without hesitation. Cameron stood still for a long moment. Watching. Remembering. Later that week, he gathered a new advisory council, not made up of executives, but of educators, disability advocates, and travelers who had lived through discrimination. They debated, challenged, and rewrote every policy from scratch. By the end of the meeting, Cameron walked to the whiteboard and wrote. 1. Equal access. 2. No behavioral profiling. 3. Passenger dignity over protocol. These aren't ideals, he said. They're requirements. And they were. Within a month, Skybridge Air no longer existed in name. The airline had been fully rebranded. Coal Air. Named after Cameron's father, a bus driver who had always told him, the road may not be fair, son, but make sure your seat is earned. At airports across the nation, new systems rolled out, encrypted boarding verification, bias detection software, and AI monitoring for discriminatory patterns. Employees underwent retraining. Those who failed to uphold new standards were dismissed. Passengers noticed. An elderly couple upgraded without request. A black teenager greeted without question. A mother with 2 small kids offered help before she could ask. This wasn't PR. This was change. Cameron Ellison never made a speech. Never posted a statement. He didn't need to. The silence that once marked his exclusion had become the anthem of a quiet revolution. The skies no longer whispered judgment. They welcomed. And justice, once denied, now boarded first.